So, on Monday, February 26, 2024, there was a Supreme Court hearing on social media laws, specifically over Texas and Florida laws where the states want to not allow social media companies to regulate the content on their platforms due to possible discrimination against conservatives. We will not know of the ruling for a few months now. Um, what do you know about this?
I know very little.
I don't know anything.
So just hearing that initial, what are your thoughts on that?
I understand where they're like, well, we don't want to be overshadowed or we don't want to like be in the dark. But at the same time, I feel like maybe it wouldn't be such a bad thing. But then I feel like, well, is it like censorship? Would it be kind of like censorship?
It kind of makes me think of how they're trying to ban apps like TikTok in certain states. So it's interesting to me that they're trying to just put laws into place that, basically prohibit apps from regulating people talking on their platforms because they're trying to get rid of apps themselves.
Something that was put into question is if social media should be considered a common carrier. A common carrier, in simple terms, is something that is considered a need and must be accessible to all. For example, electric and water companies aren't allowed to shut off their services to someone's house just because they didn't like what they said. So, in the case of social media, they wouldn't be able to remove users for things they post on the platforms. Should social media be considered a common carrier?
I think so, but I think almost to an extent. I do think that there's some things that should not be on social media platforms because you have such a wide audience, age wise, and it's whereas like yes, there is a lot of information out there that everybody needs to know, and social media is a great way to find out about what's happening in different countries in different states, like like what's happening in Palestine and like all of that stuff. You wouldn't really know that if you didn't have social media. But at the same time, I do think there's just maybe some things that shouldn't be on there. But I guess for the most part, yes, I do think it should be accessible to all.
I think social media is ultimately a business. Like each people who, all the people who run it and everything. Like at the end of the day, you sign terms. You agree to terms and conditions and the policies that they have for their apps. So if you violate their policies, then there are consequences to that.
So in 1927, the Radio Act made it so that those who could broadcast had to do so in the interest of the public. Years later, the Fairness Doctrine was created. Like the Radio Act, it made it so those broadcasting had to give an equal presentation of topics and sides. People believed, and still do, if one political party controlled the airwaves, and now social media, they can take over. It is why conservatives are concerned about being quote unquote discriminated against on social media platforms. They think that they will be smothered out by a sudden rise of quote unquote liberal propaganda. However, there are people who think that social media is too interactive for there to be any good way to give equal access to political parties. People can block terms and people from their feeds and create an echo chamber of sorts. Do you think that there should be a regulation on social media like there was for the Radio Act?
I don't think so. I think, whereas I think there could be some benefits to it, so that way you know what is going on in both political parties. I don't think somebody should almost be forced to see the opinions and everything of a political party that they're not aligned with. You know, I feel like if they're going out of their way to avoid this, then why should they have to see it if they're not choosing to?
People are going to talk about what they want to talk about on social media regardless, and maybe there are more people on one side than others because of the generation divide, like Gen Z, Gen X, and like millennials and all of them. So like it could seem like there is propaganda, and maybe there is to some extent, but ultimately, like, there should be a level of free speech on social media, and you can't control what every person on social media does, right?
So, under the First Amendment, we have the freedom of speech, the ability to say our thoughts and opinions, both verbally and through written text, with a few restrictions in place for safety. The tech companies don't want to be seen as neutral ground that hosts what people post anymore, but instead wants to be known as the editors with the ability to fact check posts and correct misinformation. This would put them in the same box as other telecommunications like newspapers, which they hope would save them from some legal issues. They would have the protection of the press with this. If the ruling goes in favor of the states, it will not allow social media platforms to remove posts unless they break a law. However, there are people who believe that not allowing social media companies to regulate their platform raises a freedom of speech issue. It is believed that if the ruling goes in favor of the tech companies, then they will be able to remove posts and users, but are also able to do loads of censorship. A concern about these laws is the First Amendment and how the ruling could lead to further looking and rethinking how it is used and can be applied from then on. With your knowledge as of now, how much an effect would the ruling have on future cases? What precedent would they be setting?
I feel like it kind of gives the impression that maybe the First Amendment isn't as important or it's not as protected, I guess, because I understand needing to fact check posts and everything like that. But when it gets to the point of they're able to censor things or delete posts because it's not correct, but also there might be a hidden agenda of that, and you're using the First Amendment as your card to like get away with it, I feel like it weakens the amendment.
I could see how like social media platforms being able to take away, take off certain users and take off, certain content could be a problem, especially if there is a bias within the company, especially because, social media does influence everyone who uses it, right?